Okay. So this is the structure of my talk, a little introduction. I'll talk a little about the Eurozone debt crisis, electronic payment opportunities due to new technology, advantages of a parallel electronic currency as opposed to just a parallel currency, political considerations, because this is not necessarily easy, an NGO currency as opposed to a government currency, and that's a few words in conclusion. So there are two papers here, and you can't see the links because of the color or something, but no worries, this will be made available through the conference conveners. But there are two papers, and the title of this talk is a bit misleading because it focuses solely on the issue of whether it's possible to exit in the Eurozone in a non-damaging way. But I also will talk about parallel currencies, and the second of the two papers are about parallel currencies outside of the government. Let's call it NGO currencies. Before proceeding, thanks to Margaret Kennedy, who's talking later today, because she was my original inspirator for my interest in parallel currencies, which has been sort of switched on and off for 16 years. I'm a control engineer, and if you compare a complex monetary macro system to a complex process plants with like distillation columns, tanks, you have to keep control of pressure, temperature, flows, volumes, etc. And then keep these within small bounds, and above all, the system has to be stable. So this is my sort of attitude to complex systems. But in macroeconomics, at least in the mainstream, even instabilities are not recognized or very interesting. And as an engineer, I can't understand it. From an engineering standpoint, if you have a complex system that doesn't work, you fix the system and you change the whole way of running it. Okay, so let's go to the Eurozone debt crisis. I don't have many diagrams here, it's mostly a verbal presentation and there will be no mathematics, but this is a diagram essentially showing a benevolent monetary circuit. You have firms, you have households who consume, and some of them also invest, and firms transact in between them, so these arrows are monetary flows. So you have stocks in these blocks, these units, in the firm units and in the household units, and you have flows between all units. So essentially an economy is a collection of interrelated stocks and flows. That's my attitude, or my sort of understanding of an economic system on the macro level. No banks in this diagram, so let's put banks and finance into the system. At the bottom here is the diagram on the last page, a bit simplified. We have all the flows aggregated together, that's GDP, so it's using the traditional Y symbol. And if we have all the stocks together, held by households and firms, this is the monetary circulation system. And then we have this parasitic thing up here, which forces debt service out of the non-financial system down here. But it returns the money with conditions. And seen from the financial system, there is a leakage because they have to pay their wages and buy stuff for running the financial system. And seen from down here, this leakage is a good thing. If there was no leakage at all, you would simply have these flows here growing exponentially all the time, which in fact they do, even in spite of the leakage. And what you get, you end up with a situation where these flows related to debt service and new loans completely crowd out the real economic flows, the aggregate arrow down here, and the system gets brittle. And that is my main take on how a financial capitalist system simply can't continue with financial accumulation. So this is my sort of very brief analysis of the euro crisis. Okay, and this is to Michael Hudson coming later on this conference, because he has that position, which I agree with. The fundamental problem is too much debt related to GDP. Debt must be written off, at least a large share of it. But parallel currencies, electronically mediated, can strongly ameliorate today's situation. And that will be my focus in full. Okay, next bit of the presentation, electronic payment opportunities, which is a case of how technological developments makes things possible that were not possible earlier. These developments mercilessly tend towards the death of physical currency. That's my prediction. I say in some decades, that's a bit optimistic, but at least in 100 years. Example one, what's happening? Mobile phone payment system, like the M-Pesa system in Kenya, where people pay regular money using SMS via mobile phone. There are no, you don't need bills and coins, and you don't need a local bank branch, but you can pay the guy in the other village through the mobile system. That's coming up in several developing countries, and it works very well in, for example, Kenya. Example two, payment via FPOS card. It's also called a debit card, isn't it, in English? That you can use in the supermarket. Yeah, okay. Debit card, FPOS card. Take Norway, 5 million inhabitants, 12.3 million cards as of last year, 300 transactions per person per year, 200 transactions per second just before Christmas, run by a private company. Why do I involve this? Just to point that both the mobile phone system and the FPOS system has immense capacity. I mean, there's no technological limit to how much you can transact. And also, because these systems have worked over many years, they enjoy trust by the public. They have just as much trust as physical currency. Because, I mean, people do not lose money. Okay, next point, advantages of a parallel electronic currency. So I will go for mobile phones, not FPOS. And the reason for that is that with a mobile phone monetary mediation system, you don't need terminals. I mean, you know, in the shops they have terminals where you put your card in the FPOS system, and that's a bit expensive. And it's not something that you can establish in a large scale in a parallel system for a low cost. So use the existing mobile system. So we imagine a mobile system resembling the Kenyan system, but with parallel currency, not regular currency. And it's run by some branch of the central bank in a euro crisis country. And let us call this EC, emergency currency. Later on, I will come to doing this outside the government and the central bank in a given country. So relax, it's not necessarily dependent upon the government doing this. But I'll go through that first. Public employees are partly paid in ECs, emergency currency, say 30% at the outset, but the share increasing, the rest in euros. That may seem a large amount, but we are talking about countries with over 20% regular unemployment and over 50% regular youth unemployment. So the situation is completely dramatic. A massive hiring of unemployed into the public sector takes place. These are paid in the same euro EC mix. The National Central Bank creates electronic ECs out of thin air and lends this for the government to spend. This is large-scale deficit spending. I put lend in quotation marks because I consider the central bank to be part of the government, which is the distinction is artificial and very political. All citizens and firms have EC accounts at the central bank. All EC transactions go via mobile phone. This is technologically possible, and there is no capacity limit to speak of. ECs can be used to partly pay taxes. This is an incentive for firms and persons to have confidence in ECs, following the modern. Sorry.
Could you be less quick?
Okay. Yeah. I'll be less quick. This is an incentive for firms and persons to have confidence in ECs, following the modern monetary theory or chartalist argument, which I agree with. Some of you might not know about that position or debate, but you can take that to the question session. Such a system, that's my prediction, optimistic, will in a time span of a few weeks strongly improve the situation. It is very fast and cheap to establish compared to a parallel system with bills and coins. And speed is essential, since the Troika will probably try to quash it using legal arguments. The system has to get popular before the Troika gains momentum. A second advantage is that a black economy in ECs is nearly impossible. The same with tax evasion. Any transaction goes via the computer at the central bank. You can have intelligent programs evaluating all transactions 24 hours a day and popping up suspicious activities. So black economy and crime is really suddenly very difficult. Advantage number 3, A3. There is no confusion with the bills and coins like euros that also are circulating in parallel. Advantage 4, by enabling activation of idle labor and production capacity, exports increase. Thus, even if this new activity is mediated in ECs, you will have increased export capacity for the country, which gives it a better position towards the surrounding countries. Advantage 5, circulation in euros within the crisis country will also increase due to reduced pessimism, less liquidity preference. Those who hold euros will get more optimistic and they will increase their money velocity. So you have an increased euro flows, also giving a better situation. Advantage 6, which is a long story here, but it's simply that now there is a blackmail situation. These countries have to borrow euros to survive and use most of it to pay down earlier loans. Now they have a parallel currency circulating, and that means that their negotiation position towards their creditors is much better. Advantage 7, this is a 100% reserve system using the term of Irving-Fisher, and that means all deposits are high-powered money, base money at the central bank, no deposit insurance needed, confidence at maximum. Also, some more futuristic advantages Merrick mentioned. Silvio Gesel's Demirage can be implemented in an electronic system. You don't have to glue stamps to bills or anything. And here a new, probably controversial idea. A flow control mechanism for an overheated theoretical future economy. An adjustable transfer tax between any account, a tiny transfer tax. So you're simply punished if you spend your money. So it's a flow tax. And that is the opposite of the Demirage mechanism. It blocks spending in an overheated situation. That is also possible in this electronic via the central bank system. So the above system is run by the government plus its central bank. Further below, I will discuss the case of a system outside the government, NGO model. Okay, and now to political considerations. This is my political view. The EU elite, corporations, mainstream media pundits, and other powers are wedded to the Euro project. They will fight such solutions with tooth and nail, probably even the elite in the hardest hit Euro crisis. You could, just to be nice to them, you could suggest keeping the euro. You can have the euro, but as a bridge currency, like Keynes did for a world currency, the bunker, his proposal from Bretton Woods in 1944, and letting EU countries implement national currencies with exchange rate control mechanism in the spirit of Keynes' original proposal. So this is sort of, we can offer them this idea. You can have your ECB and your euro and revisions and everything, but could we do this? But would that convince? I'm pessimistic and believe that any reform that may be interpreted as a step backwards towards a more national economy be refused. So, NGO currency. We assume that an alliance of popular organizations, possibly including some creative firm, establishes a NETS, a national exchange trading system. This national scope, as opposed to the traditional LETS implementations, has now become possible because using the mobile network. Most arguments given earlier for the convenience of a government-run mobile-mediated emergency currency also holds for a NETS. Imagine giving out, say, 1,000 value points, notice I don't call it currency, to any individual being a member of the NETS. They need not be initially earned, they are given out. This is the Kickstarter system. All individuals that are members of organizations in the NETS Alliance automatically receives these points. Any other individual or firm can open a NETS account, even if they are not given the 1,000 points initially. The VP's faith, not fiat currency, will it flop? Obviously, that's the question. Well, consider two system properties, need and confidence. Confidence will be net near zero, but need will be immense at the start. Think of Greece and Spain. Need will ensure that some accept VPs as payment initially. This will increase confidence somewhat, and a positive contagion process will unfold. How much time? No. Okay, I'll finish soon. The VP will probably reach some fairly stable value after a start at zero or close to zero value, and of course some initial volatility. You can get away from that. Note that since the initial issued amount of value points are given out, this is an experiment that, if unsuccessful, may be terminated with minimum legal consequences. You can't complain if points that you got as a gift are taken away from you, so you can stop the whole thing. It's not a dangerous experiment. This is a medium of exchange in crisis. It's not a vehicle for saving or accumulation. But we can discuss that later on if the scheme gets truly successful. One may expect strong resistance from above to an NGO-run parallel currency, from the EU system, but also from domestic elites, including governments. The scheme depends on gaining strong popular support and fast. Introduction of an NGO-implemented parallel national currency will necessarily be accompanied by intense political struggle. Anyway, is there some entrepreneur out there with both a big heart and a big brain, starting and running a net system, many in crisis countries, is a big, exciting and meaningful business opportunity. I mean, you can earn regular money on doing that today. Okay, last one, the words in conclusion. As all here probably have noted, there is hardly any public debate about alternative monetary solutions, even after recent years of a global crisis that resembles the Great Depression. I'm finished soon. Or the 30s. Keynes hit the nail on the head when he said, worldly wisdom teaches that it is better for the reputation to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. So this is an uphill battle, but worth it, and less difficult today due to technology. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for being perfectly on time. And well, I'd like to introduce now Ursula Freer, who's going to organise her PowerPoints. Now, Ursula, for the last 18 years, has been legal counsel for the Central Bank of Brazil, and she's now on sabbatical. She did a doctorate in social currencies, and she's now on sabbatical studying at the London School of Economics, doing research into complementary currencies. So this is, I think, a very interesting example of central banks getting involved in a subject which is dear to our hearts. So, thank you very much. Please proceed.
First of all, I would like to thank Josh and the Net New Economic Foundation, the Forte Foundation, for the opportunity to be here to speak about social money. What I'd like to do is to share with you my experience researching on this subject. In truth, I spent 10% of my time at the central bank at defending the legality of the use of complementary currency. And I have been writing about it, and I'm going first of all to give you a brief overview of the alternative currency credit system in Brazil under the Brazilian law, so you can have an idea of the context where the studies is inserted. And why we need a complementary currency system, especially for poor communities which are not at least targeted by the microfinance programs of the financial institutions. And how can we build a complementary currency system for sustainable and inclusive finance, which is my current research. I'll try to speak quickly with all my difficulties with the English, so I hope you can understand as much as you can, and don't try to read the slides because I'm only going to comment, and it will be available if you want to go in there. So the Brazilian experiment with complementary currency was mentioned at the 2010 report on a creative economy from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And everything started when there was a law which recognized the necessity of alternative credit systems and the civil for NGOs. When you are trying to make an experimentation for not-for-profit, you can get a qualification by the Ministry of Justice in Brazil, and this puts you in a category that if enterprises give you some funds to fund your activity, they will not pay tax on there is an exemption. And the Solidarity Finance Initiatives, they came the first time with this kind of organization. Any kind of NGO can qualify for being a civil society public interest organization. The first case was the Community Bank Palmas. It was a long and slow development. After the law, they were qualified as OCIP, and which is the civil society of public interest, and the central bank challenged the legality of the use of a complementary currency and tried to stop it, but they went to the justice and they had a judicial decision that they were not issuing money. They were using a tool for local development. And then the central bank, before the decision, the central bank had to review its position, and it was already maintaining conversation to understand what was going on. After that, they received support from the Brazilian government, and there is the first signed document, official document, in support of social money and the community development banks, which were signed by the Ministry of Labor and Employment, the Ministry of Social Development, and the Ministry of Agrarian Development. And the central bank started a project to study social money, and I was the technical coordinator for this project, which after we concluded that was not illegal, it was included in the financial inclusion project of the central bank. The central bank is very active in Brazil, trying to find ways to include the more number of the poor population in financial services and products. And now we are just discussing the regulation. Should we regulate it or not? The communities want us to regulate it because they want to be the few people, they would be safe, and they wouldn't be challenged because Brazil is very big, and every time they are running another system, they are challenged. They have to go to the police as they are doing a crime, and the police has to write to the central bank, and then we have to study this specific case and get them smart to work on that. But now they are like recognized as community development banks. They are hired by the financial institutions as non-banking agents, so they can provide for in poor communities all kinds of services on behalf of the banks, the authorized banks, and they can offer loans with special interest rates under the other programs of the government for microcredit, and they offer loans with no interest using a local social currency system, which is supported by discounts in the local commerce. And they also provide training and capacity building for community members with the view of territorial and solidarity economic development. It's almost impossible to discuss here the process of legal analysis to conclude that the community currency in Brazil wasn't considered illegal, but we start with it should not receive the official legal tender, and it should not has effects in the normal circulation of the official money. And we have many laws, and if he passed the test of compatibility, which is very difficult, they will be considered not illegal, but this does not mean that they are legal. It's something very interesting to tell you about that. So the social money today is considered in Brazil a tool to promote local development and a new way to promote the integration of people to the labor market. I was very happy to know about the Tron's work, because it's almost what he says. If you cannot work, if you are without employment, you can have another way to find an economic living in your life. And we have in Brazil a very democratic constitution, which has strong economic and social rights for the individual and for community. So it would be a tool that would be protected by if it's experimented to local development, it would be protected by constitutional law. And for this reason, there is now a national action to promote the solidarity economy, and a special program on solidarity finance based on community banks and with the solidarity funds, and some of them, almost all of them, use complementary currency. And we have now like a big challenge, because the multi-year plan of the federal government wants to include more than 200 communities in solidarity finance, and this would mean like 200 social currencies, different social currencies. And that's why the communities who are running these currencies, they want to have a more legal certainty to their work, because they spend lots of time and volunteer work on this. And then I'll try to briefly tell you about the challenges on the legal and technical issues that are meriting further research in almost all the countries. Why it's legally possible to establish complementary currency, and the development of creative institutions has been targeted as one of the goals of the federal government for elimination poverty. To construct an adequate legal and regulatory framework is not an easy task, because you can, when you regulate, you need to supervise and you need to restrict some rights, and sometimes the freedom that is important for the program to be successful. And the other challenge is how to enable this scale solidarity finance to serve continuously these poor communities and small and medium business. And but the lack of this is what I defended in my PhD thesis, that the lack of this legal and regulatory framework works like a Damocles sword, because we say the people are free to run these systems, but they have to comply with the law that they do not know exactly which are the details of the law. And then but I say also, if you cross the limit, you will be punished, and this is a crime, and you can be in jail. So the lack of this adequate legal and regulatory framework, it's a violation of constitutional rights, because the people cannot exercise their rights because they do not know which are the limits. And there will be always a gray zone. Why? Because the main goal of monetary policy is to keep the level of aggregate expenditure consistent with the production capacity. And I cannot explain everything about that, but all new currency system and all alternative affects in some way the purchasing power. If I use a complementary currency to buy something, but not the aggregate level. Sometimes you have a very big impact for the individual and for the community, and you have no impact or positive impact for the macro level. So you have to analyze each case to see if it's possible. And it's not possible with a complex economy to do that in each case. So it's much easier for a lawyer at the central bank to say, this is not legal, because I do not have to think, I do not have to understand about that, I do not have to waste my time saying that something, study which are the technical design of this specific scheme to see if it produces one effect or other. But in almost all jurisdictions, there are many legal and regulatory issues that are open for discussion. So we do not have like someone that's really good on this kind of matter to just adapt to our context. We need really to develop the knowledge like we are doing here or in other forums. And the first question is exactly which would be the ideal legal and regulatory, but we have many other things that we should discuss. But what I would like to emphasize here is why I think a complementary currency is necessary. Is exactly because you have a strong inequality of access to financial instruments in the financial system. If you take a picture of all the financial assets that we have in one financial system, and this is the picture of Brazil in 2009, you will see that you have a mismatch between people, the amount of money, and the number of people. And you have too many people in the bottom, and too few people in the top, with too much money in the top and few money in the bottom. But everybody in a common currency area or in the national economy are obliged to use the national currency. But they do not have access to create money with the same equal treatment. This part are like people who are not included in the formal financial instruments, and they do not have access. And you need to develop a different, a complementary kind of currency so they can make transactions in real economy. In Brazil, this represents like 1/4 of the community, the whole country. And you have the main programs of transfer of income. And the bad news is that the state cannot do anything for that, because more debt instruments inside the system will make the problem worse. And the good news, which is not not new is that the currency is created by the human intelligence, and we can work out to have a more compatible designs. So we already have all technology and legal techniques to do that, to facilitate and maintain the reciprocity of social relations in the free market of exchange at the bottom of the pyramid without harming the macroeconomic economy. And always will be money denominated in legal tender and social money or common tender that could be accepted without any law, even in the informal economy. So I'm just going to show very quickly my current research is about how to build the currency system that works out. And I propose it will be in partnership with the private, public, and civil society organization, and with electronic system as defended by Tony. And we need to find a canon of measure for each local social money, from an initial quantity of resource that need not to be money, as he said, it could be values or points, something like that. An adequate distribution of rights and responsibility, everybody being equally treated within the system. And the velocity of growth is devolved to the community. As they can create money, they would do it. And just we have today in the Brazilian economy plenty of resources for doing that, because we have donors and we have banks that have to destinate 2% of sight deposits for microfinance, and they are not doing that, and they are punished leaving the money without interest at the central bank. And we have many programs that could be used. The thing is to design, to measure the economic impact, which is very important because it's the way that you will know if the system is legal or not. Trust and management, we have techniques to do that, and creating conditions for local development. I saw a question about taxes, and the local government in Brazil, they create a program of saving points where you give your number, fiscal number, when you buy something in the commerce, and then at the end of the year, they discount that on your housing taxes or other kind of taxes. For example, I earned like $600, and I didn't have to pay my tax in housing tax this year. And this is not to be reading, or because I want to have time, just to show you what I'm working using. This connection between complementary currency and the banks, and we can assure that all the accounts have a tendency to grow, even the debt instruments, if we use initial resources from money, and we can run win-win game. So all the participants, all the system will grow like that, all the participants' accounts, and all the monetary resources that could be appropriated by investors or government or who else work in the scheme to maintain the system. And that's it. I thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very inspiring, and I hope your message gets spread around to all the other central banks around the world to start experimenting. I think the statement of this conference would draw attention to your leadership in this example as what the central banking system can do. Now, I'd like to introduce Professor Dr. Margaret Kennedy, who 30 years ago was the head of the Department of Research in Ecology and Energy in Berlin. And it occurred to her that there's a problem with the money system of earning interest. And for the next 15 years, she part-time developed this idea, and to be full-time in it for the next 15 years. So I'll leave it over to Margaret to share with her insights, which have spread around the world. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Shad. And thank like Marusa, Trond, like Michael and so on, and to have the opportunity to exchange your experiences. I'm going to go back to some, how do I know? I have to change. Oh, this is Sigmund, this is the first I have heard with. Okay, very good. So, as you see, I shortened the title of my lecture from the program to just using new concepts we can rule money. The reason is that there is a wonderful picture on the Spiegel some months ago, which shows, and the subtitle says, "Money rules the world, but who rules money?" It shows the leaders of the richest nations in the world being puppets at from the global stock exchange. You can't see that very well here, but basically they're all on strings. Exactly, that's a much better way. But let's keep the lights out, because this will be helpful for the presentation. Thank you.
No.
Keep the lights out? Can you please leave the lights on, because it will be much better to read the presentation. Okay, well, this is the situation. According to an IMF statistic, you know, we have had 124 banking crises, 326 currency crises, and 64 debt crises within a short time span of 37 years. The basic message of this slide is it is not a problem of having some bankers who are screwing the system, who are getting more than they actually should. I don't believe the whole problem we're in is a problem of personalities or the, as heißt Gier in English, but greed, the greed of people, as we discussed the other night. I think it is a systemic problem we're having. And when I discovered some 30 years ago this graph, I suddenly understood why the growth of money, which is growing exponentially with interest and compound interest, and the growth in nature, which is always stopping at an optimal size, can never ever help me to get enough money for my ecological projects. And this also shows that once, I mean, if this natural growth curve would also apply to an economy where at a certain point it is more or less saturated, that if the demands for money, with interest, cannot be met by the economy anymore, the only way to honor these demands is that the money system will go into speculation and more depend on growing in this realm, which is a virtual realm where growth can actually happen without being linked to anything real. This is the first misconceptions. I have learned that if I don't explain these three misconceptions, which are basic, there are 30 or more, which also are very important